Thank you very much and welcome all to the Planning Committee on the 5th of October. First item on our agenda, apologies for absence. I know we've had a few.
Yeah, from Councillor Peter Black, Chair.
Just Peter Black, okay. Right, thank you. No others, anyone over? Item 2 then is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Are there any? No, thank you. Item 3 is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record. And you see them starting at page 1 to 6, page 1, 2, page 3 and 4, page 5, and page 6. Would somebody move them as a true record, please?
Yeah, move.
Thank you. For deferral, okay. There are no items for deferral. So we move on to item 4, is determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And you see the first item there is on page 10. Item 1 is Drummer House in Birch Grove, and that's over to Andrew. Okay. No. Yeah.
Are you there, Andrew? We can see you there, but we can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
You want to try leaving and rejoining, Andrew, perhaps? He's just gone out.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah. Shall we? Yeah. Okay. Members, if it's all right, then perhaps while Andrew comes back, we can go on to item 3. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, shall we do that? And you find that on page 39, and that's Windmill Farm. And Chris, this is yours.
Yes, it is, Chairman. If I just, I mean, I think the report is quite kind of self-explanatory, but I'll briefly explain to members what the background is. January 2019, the council granted temporary planning permission for the siting of 10 timber camping pods at the site. If you can, so the site's there. You can see Windmill Farm. And the application site is outlined in red. If you can just go down to the next slide, Ian. It shows a very brief layout plan of the 10 pods. So nine of them are smaller pods, and there's one slightly larger one in the bottom left-hand corner where Ian's cursor is there. So if you can go down to the next slide, please, Ian. So that's one of the smaller pods. You can see that they aren't very big at all. They are predominantly faced in timber. The next slide should show the slightly larger unit. Again, not particularly big. And I think the last slide should show a photograph of the site. So you can see there are the pods. Not quite all of them, but that is the majority of them. You can see the bigger unit in the kind of background on the left. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what was granted in 2019. So that was a temporary permission that expired on the 1st of May this year. So the application before you today seeks consent to extend the life or renew that former temporary permission. So when we consider renewal applications, there are 3 tests which we take into account, and those 3 tests are set out on pages 55 and 56 of the report. In this particular case, tests 2 and 3 are met. There's quite a simple explanation for why that is in the report. But the main test for us to consider in this case is test 1, and that is, have there been any material changes in circumstances since the previous application was granted? So there are 2 arms to that, or 2 limbs rather. The first one is, have site circumstances changed? In this case, they haven't. So the site hasn't really changed, neither have the site surroundings changed. But the one thing that has changed is our policy, the policy context of the site. We have obviously adopted the Swansea Local Development Plan in February 2019, which now includes a different raft of conditions, policies against which the application now needs to be assessed against. The main policy for consideration today, I would suggest, is policy TR6. Now, TR6 specifically says that no new static caravan sites will be permitted within the Gower, and that's due to a landscape capacity issue at the Gower. And in the explanation within the LDP, it actually classifies these camping pods as a form of static caravan. So they've got to be considered on the same basis. So we have advertised the application as a departure because, as I've explained, they technically are akin to a static caravan, and policies TR6 says those type of developments will not be supported. However, I mean, you can see from the photographs before you, the scale and general appearance of these camping pods are very, very different to a static caravan. I mean, they are not, well, they are nowhere near as conspicuous as a conventional static caravan would be within the landscape. So, given the fact that this is a renewal application, there have been no objections from local residents or from any consultees. We have not received any complaints in the last 2.5 years since the pods were originally installed. We think that that the application basically should be supported. We have, so although there is a technical departure from the LDP in that the proposal is technically contrary to TR6, we feel that the general aims and thrust of TR6 are not to prohibit this form of development, which we think is the type of development which would be or should be supported in this type of setting. If the application before you was for 10 static caravans, I suspect our recommendation would be one of refusal. But given the specifics related to this proposal and the fact that it is a renewal, we consider that the application should be supported. We are therefore recommending that the application be approved, subject to conditions as set out on page 59. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I can see a hand up there. First off, the local members here anyway. Councillor Lewis, then Councillor Thomas.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Can I say I'm very pleased with the recommendation here. In fairness to Windmill Farm, they have delivered a very substantial and a very high quality business. And it is certainly attracting people from outside the area, and they are no bother to anybody else. There's no noise with them. They keep it very well organized. And certainly I think these are a great addition because they are absolutely on site when they have a wedding. And I think that, as far as I'm concerned, the way that the owners have run the site is exemplary. We are very lucky in Carl, where we've got a number of site owners that operate very well within the limits, and they are attracting people from outside. And to be honest with you, they've gone through a very difficult time with the pandemic, and I think that to turn this down would certainly be a very bad thing for them. We need to bring business to Gower. The days of agriculture being the main employer have gone. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I love what they're doing here. I've seen it, and the views from there are to die for, and I think it's fantastic. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm delighted with the recommendation of the officers. It is a continuation of the business. It is not a new application, and as long as they continue as they are, I think as a city council we'd be pleased to have people like that operating within the Gower area, and I fully support it, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. My next speaker is Councillor Des Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, nothing against the application personally, just a little confused with Chris's presentation, saying that if these were caravans, they were likely to have a different response from the planners. Therefore, are we, and the policy being that no further caravan sites would be permitted, are we tend to be opening sort of floodgates of saying that if farmers or landowners come up with a scheme for pods as opposed to caravans, that they would be allowed, whereas caravans would not be allowed?
We'll come back and get that answer. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Following here on from Councillor Thomas's comment, really, in regards to obviously with TR6 policy, fully supportive of the application, you know. But all just wanted clarity, really, would we perhaps be setting a precedence because of what the new measures that are coming under the TR6 policy?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. As I said, I'll get some answers there. Councillor Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not against the recommendation, and I've got to say, Councillor Des Thomas, I've taken every word out of my mouth, so I won't say any more.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Same here,
All right.
Chair, but I would like to support this because I hope I'm not being prejudicial. I am a caravan owner, and I can see what this can do for tourism for the Gower, but I'm not, I'm not against it because it's already been on site and it's made its mark, and I'm quite happy with the proposal.
Well done, thank you. Councillor Will Evans.
Yeah, same here, Chair. Precisely the same comments as Councillor Thomas and others. My concern is the knock-on effect of similar applications. Obviously, once we set a precedent, it's difficult to knock it back at sometimes. So I'd like to know, hear the views of the planning officer on that point.
Yeah, there's a few points there. Thank you, Will. Councillor Mike Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I must say the outlook is very much in keeping with the landscape. In fact, these pods, to me, at first glance, look like haystacks. My only concern is, and I'd like Chris to answer if he can you tell us if you would have placed restrictions on the occupation of these pods, timing restrictions, i.e. are they just be staying there a month, 2 months, 3 months, or what we wouldn't like to see is people occupying these 12 months of the year. I just wanted to clarify that with you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
No, great. Can't see any other hands up. So, Chris, a few things there to respond to.
Yeah, so I'll answer the last question first because that's probably the easiest one to answer. In terms of occupation, Councillor Lewis, I draw your attention to condition 3. So condition 3 limits the occupation of the pods to any person or persons to no more than 28 consecutive days or 65 days in any calendar year. So if you want to stay there, you could go there for, say, a month and have a second month later in the year, perhaps, but you're limited to 65 days per year. And the whole intention of that condition is to stop the pods being occupied by someone on a more permanent basis. So the intention is they are there as holiday accommodation only, and that condition does secure that. It's a standard condition that we've used elsewhere, and it does seem to work. In terms of the other condition, the other issue raised in terms of precedent. Now, this was an issue that we were certainly very, very mindful of when we were determining the application. And I'm always conscious, especially on the Gower, that if we do approve one form of development which is contrary to policy, you will have other site operators pointing out that as an example and using it as a precedent, and so on. So we have kind of grappled with that quite a bit, actually. Now, what I think my colleagues in policy have said is that policy TR6 specifically says no static caravans. So I think that the policy is mainly aimed at preventing your conventional caravans, your conventional static caravans from popping up elsewhere in the Gower. I think when we've looked at figures for static caravans in the Gower, we've got several thousand of them, and I think we'd all have a view in the planning department that we've got enough static caravans at the moment, and obviously they do create visual impact on the landscape. So the policy is there to prevent any more of those type of developments. Now, I think in terms of these timber pods, they have inadvertently been caught out by the policy, if you like. I don't think it was the intention of the policy to stop small-scale, relatively unobtrusive type developments. Although we do acknowledge that, strictly speaking, the policy should prevent this type of development from taking place. I'm also conscious that I know we've got another application which will be coming to committee in the next month or so for, again, for timber pods. So, again, I do share councillors' concerns that if we approve this, we could be setting a precedent for that application. Although the one thing I would say about this is the circumstances are slightly different in that we did grant permission for this prior to the adoption of the LDP. The initial application was approved at January 2019, a month before the LDP was adopted, and it is through no fault of their own that the operators are now faced with a situation where they've had permission, they want to renew, and obviously there's been a change in policy. Visually, I think the site is kind of quite well visually contained. You've not got extensive views into the site from the broader area. The pods are kind of quite low. They do tend to blend in to the landscape given their size and the materials used. But I think it's a decision for councillors. As I say, it is a departure, but I think our view is it is an acceptable departure, if I can put it that way. Yeah. So as councillors, I think you need to take a balanced view, really, in terms of whether you want to stick rigidly to our policy or whether you think there's scope to promote this type of development, which we have encouraged elsewhere within the borough, because we think it adds to the offer of tourist accommodation on the Gower. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we've got literally thousands of static caravans. This offers something different. And the other thing to mention, I think, is this also promotes the economic generation of the farm and the wedding business taking place. So there are also economic benefits associated with that, which I think you need to have regard to, which I know is mentioned in the report.
Okay.
So,
yeah, thank you, Chris. Councillor Evans, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you said there, Chris. One thing you didn't mention, and I don't know whether it's an issue of great concern, but the extra traffic that this will bring to the Gower and congestion in busy periods of the year. For instance, the people using the pods they will be coming by vehicle, I assume. And where do they leave the vehicles? Alongside the pod, is it? And, you know, I'm just saying, this is a small scale, but if it's allowed to mushroom up a lot more, because as you said, there's one in the pipeline as well, it's something, traffic congestion on the narrow roads in Gower at peak times of the year is bad. So can you just comment on that?
Okay.
Yeah, well, in terms of parking, I know there's sufficient car parking within the site. We've not had any highway objections. And as I say, it's been operated for the last 2.5 years. We've not had any complaints about any parking issues. You know, given the site's location, it is in the middle of the countryside. I would suspect that the majority of people visiting the pods are going to arrive by car, as is the case for all of our camping sites on the Gower, I suspect. But you know, we are talking about only 10 units, so I don't think there's going to be any large-scale traffic congestion created by the proposal, because we are looking. It is small scale. I mean, if you think of some of the bigger sites, you've got Councillor down in Portynan, for example. I know they do have traffic problems in the main village due to there's a bit of a bottleneck there. But at North Gower, the kind of biggest sites are few and far between. So this particular site, the highway network serving the site seems to be adequate. And as I say, we are talking of only 10 pods. And I've not heard of any problems in the last 2.5 years with this site.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We have no other members wishing to speak, so that being the case, we can, all being well, we can move to a vote on this. You see the recommendation is on page 62 is one of approval. So Gareth, when you're ready, we can...
Yeah, excuse me. Councillor Cyril Anderson?
For.
Councillor Phil Downing?
For.
Will Evans?
For.
Mary Jones?
For.
Mike Lewis?
For.
Richard Lewis?
For.
Des Thomas?
For.
Linda Taylor Lloyd? Mike White?
For.
And Paul Lloyd.
Yeah, well, thank you.
10 for unanimous.
Okay, well, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And all being well, now we go back to item 1, which you see again is on page 2 in the Strummer House. Andrew, are you with us now?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Sorry about that, members. So this application, we've got a presentation to give, which Ian will run through, is for the stationing of caravans for residential purposes for 4 number gypsy pitches, together with the formation of additional hardstanding and ancillary works. I'd just like to start off by referring members to the update sheet. You'll note there is an error in the report, as clarified in there, and condition 4 needs to be amended as well. So what we have before us is the site location plan. Just to give a bit of background, this application is to be considered at committee as the development is contrary to the local development plan and is recommended for approval. The application is a Section 73 application to amend conditions attached to the previous temporary planning permission granted in 2007 at Planning Committee. The application seeks a permanent permission via the removal of condition 2 in its entirety, preferably, which limits the permission to a temporary personal permission, and the removal of condition 3, requiring the building and the caravans to be removed and the land to be restored when the temporary period expires. That application followed a previous temporary permission granted on appeal for 4 years in 2013, following a refusal of permission in 2012. So the application site is outlined in red and comprises an area of land located to the east of Birchgrove Road, to the rear of a pumping station and to the south of New Drummer House. If you can go to the next view, please, Ian. The next slide. Thank you. So what we've got 2 aerial images from Google. The aerial view of the site on the left, with the site indicated by a red arrow. This view shows the site in its wider location before the development was undertaken, with Birchgrove located to the south and the settlement of Gleis located to the north. The aerial image on the right-hand side of the screen shows the site as it has been laid out, with New Drummer House located to the north and the pumping station location to the east between the site and Birch Grove Road. You'll also note the residential properties located at the south of the access into the site at the bottom of the aerial images. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian. On the left-hand side of the screen, you've got an excerpt from the LDP, which highlights the identified green wedge, with again the arrow indicating the site location within the green wedge. So policy ER3 seeks to protect the green wedge and its openness, which is supported by Planning Policy Wales. It's effectively a buffer to prevent coalescence between settlements. The image in the top right-hand corner is of the access to the site, looking north along the frontage of Birch Grove Road, with residential properties on the right-hand side of the road excluded from the green wedge designation. The image on the bottom is from the far end of the site, looking southeast back towards Birch Grove effectively, but over the site, with the hedges and growth in the foreground, and you can see the accommodation visible through the vegetation, obviously being mindful that this is taken from the Google van. Go to the next slide, please, Ian. This is of the approved layout. So this plan was submitted with the original appeal. So it does differ to that which is on site, but this is the one that we need to consider as part of the application. So what you'll see are 4 caravans and ancillary utility day rooms have been approved on site with space for a tourer caravan associated with each plot. Access to the site is from the south, as shown in the previous photographs, and landscaping is proposed along the western boundary of the site. So in terms of the application itself, we've had 36 letters of objection were received in response, raising concerns with increased traffic, highway safety, increased crime, development in the green wedge, devaluation of properties, and the potential for an intensification of use. Local member Councillor Matthews has also objected to the proposals, as outlined in the report, due to the impact on the green wedge, encroachment between Gleis and Birch Grove, highway safety, the potential for future applications, and that the temporary site is clearly visible. So in terms of the assessment, as stated in the report, there is a varied planning history at the site, but in terms of a brief timeline, the authority refused an application in 2012 for 3 reasons. One of those reasons was dropped prior to the appeal. At appeal, an inspector considered the proposals to be acceptable on balance and granted temporary permission for 4 years, whilst the authority considered the needs of gypsies and travellers in the accommodation assessment. There was a task and finish group going on at that time, which was due to conclude in 2014, and in advance of the LDP, which obviously hadn't been adopted at that point. Permission was subsequently renewed in 2017 for a further 4 years to allow the authority to adopt the LDP and provide alternate site provision. So the previous applications were considered under the then unitary development plan. Obviously, that is materially different in terms of the current application. As you'll note in the report, it is a departure application, and in terms of current policy, the proposal would have a significant detrimental impact on the openness of the area in terms of policy ER3, and thereby also represent inappropriate development in the countryside that is harmful to its character in terms of policy CB2, and does not comply with policy H7 of the local development plan as outlined in the report. And Planning Policy Wales states that substantial weight should be attached to the harmful impact on the green wedge, which was considered to be moderate harm by the previous appeal inspector. However, the inspector also gave significant weight to the personal circumstances as part of the previous appeal decision, and these personal circumstances still weigh heavily in favour of the application. Whilst the application is now being considered within the LDP context, approximately 8.5 years have passed since permission was originally granted, and we've had 2 temporary permissions have been granted in that time. No sites were allocated in the LDP for gypsy and travellers on the basis of a 7-pitch site at Pantabloud Road receiving planning permission, which could accommodate the GTAA needs up to 2020. However, this assessment did not include the pitches on the current site. This permission has now lapsed without being implemented and is unlikely to be progressed as funding has not been secured, as noted in the Housing Officer's comments. So the above failure to provide meaningful alternate accommodation for the applicants for a period of over 8 years are considered to be very exceptional circumstances weighing in favour of the application. So as noted in the report, the personal circumstances are still considered to be a material consideration in the decision, and therefore it's not considered appropriate to remove the personal permission element of condition 2. So as I said, this is in part of the recommendation. We still think it should be a personal permission for the residents on site. As part of the previous appeal decision, there were 3 children on site at the point. There are now 7 children of school age resident on site. And Article 3 of the UN Convention Rights of the Child requires a child's best interest to be a primary consideration in the determination of the functions of the authority. As this is a personal permission, so as I said, we still think a personal permission is required. Condition 3 would also be required, so whilst the permission would not be temporary, it would, and therefore it wouldn't be time limited for the current residents and their dependents. The personal nature means that in the future circumstances might change and they might vacate the land, in which case it needs to be restored. So given the very exceptional circumstances outlined above, including the lack of appropriate alternate sites, either benefiting from planning permission or included within the local development plan, combined with the failure to provide alternate sites within the intervening period of 2 temporary planning permissions, and for continuity and stability of the extended family, it is not considered reasonable or necessary to attach a further condition on a temporary basis. Guidance from various circulars included in the report indicate when temporary permissions may be acceptable, but note that it is rare for temporary permissions to be granted when there is an unmet need. So therefore, the recommendation is for a permanent personal permission is therefore recommended to be secured via amendments to condition 2 and 3 to remove the time limiting nature of those conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've got first off, agent Mr. Green, would like to address this. Mr. Green, you've got 5 minutes to address this.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am Nathaniel Green from Green Planning Studio, and I'm speaking on behalf of our client, Mr. Mervyn Thomas, in support of this application. This committee is here to decide the matter on planning issues only, and this application for 4 gypsy pitches is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Our clients are accepted as having gypsy status and benefit from having those protected characteristics. The site was originally granted a temporary permission at appeal in 2013. It was then granted a further temporary permission in 2017. In both instances, the temporary permission was intended to give the LPA time to find alternative pitches for the gypsy and traveller community. But as the officer's report states, 9 years have now passed without alternative provision having been made for the residents of this site. Your officer's report accepts that the LPA still needs to identify a 5-year land supply of specific deliverable sites. It's estimated by Swansea City Council there is a recognised need for an extra 29 gypsy pitches in the 10-year period to 2025. Also, as the residents of the site were not counted in the 2015 GTAA, it is self-evident that they represent an additional 4 pitches that need to be found. Your officer's report explains at length the predicament that Swansea finds itself with regard to gypsy site provision. The unmet need for the additional pitches within Swansea is a significant material consideration that outweighs any effect on the rural character of the area. As the officer's report states, approving this application will help the council to meet its statutory duty in this regard and accords with paragraph 14 of Circular 005/2018 that identified need for pitches is met. Mr. Thomas's extended family continue to live at the site with children of school age who continue to be educated at local schools. Indeed, the continuity of their education continues to be a key factor in this application. Highways matters have already been dealt with in previous applications and are judged by the Highway Authority to be satisfactory. Please note that matters relating to planning enforcement at the site are not relevant to this particular application. Your officers contend, and we completely agree, that it would be unreasonable of the LPA to impose another temporary approval due to the length of time this site has been in existence and the fact that this would not represent the best interest of the children, as according to Article 3 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Children Act 2004. These constitute the exceptional reasons for granting a permanent permission in the Green Wedge. The granting of a personal permission would in this instance accord with Circular 005/2018. The recommendation for approval comes with 9 conditions. Our client, Mr. Thomas, is content with the maintenance of the personal condition and is happy to comply with the remainder of the conditions. And on this basis, I urge you to approve this application for permanent permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's one of the local members here now, Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Chair. I think Penny has to leave soon, so would you like to deal with her observations first? Thank you.
Sorry?
Penny has to leave soon.
All right, okay.
Okay, carry on.
Might have let us know, Penny. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm okay. If Rylan wants to go first, it's fine with me. I don't mind.
Okay, that's
We're all very polite in Cantal.
Yeah, we're all very polite in Cantal.
Yes, indeed.
Right. Who's going first now? Then you want me to go first?
Yeah. Carry on.
You carry on.
Thank you. The councillors from Llansamlet have discussed this application at length, and our main concern is concerning the Green Wedge and the fact that this would be a significant change to the policy that has been pursued by the council for many, many years. I've been a councillor since 2008, and I have kept pretty much all of my council emails for that time period. On the weekend, I went back through my council emails, looking at all the planning issues concerning the Green Wedge between Birchgrove and Gleis. And there's been 15 occasions when there's either been a formal application or a pre-application discussion. And on all of the occasions prior to this, the view of the authority, that is the officers and the councillors, has been that any development between Birchgrove and Gleis on the Green Wedge would represent a significant change to the local circumstances and would certainly open the door to future developments from other applicants. We are well aware that there are big house building firms that have inquired with local farmers about purchasing fields on the road between Birchgrove and Gleis, and those have been so far, let's say, deferred by the fact that their potential application sites would be in the Green Wedge. And the council and the council officers and councillors have said for the last 15 years, nothing to be built on the Green Wedge between Birchgrove and Gleis. And our fear in this instance is if this is approved, even though there may be exceptional circumstances, it would provide significant evidence to other potential applicants that something has been granted, so therefore they could have a go at applying for either individual residences or, as I mentioned, substantial house building sites for estates, etc. That's our main objection, and we hope that the committee would reject the application on the basis that it is a significant departure from the Green Wedge policy that the council has followed for at least 15 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matthews?
Thank you. Yes, there are a few things here that we're clearly not happy with. The Green Wedge obviously has to be the main concern, because once you start using the Green Wedge, that opens the doors. Ryland's already said for other things. You say this application is different, and yes, we respect that it is different, but so the circumstances that we've had for the last 2 years. We've had a pandemic, so we've had 2 years out of our lives that we haven't been able to do anything with regard to looking for extra sites. I understand that currently the provision of extra sites is being looked into by officers of the council, and we welcome that as well. But in years gone by, the green wedge have always been respected and looked at. The green wedge, even the inspector said, has to be returned. So clearly, the idea of the green wedge just being used wasn't in his mind. What was in his mind was, you can use it for the time being, but I want it back to the way it should be. And this is ideally what we want. I would have no objection to another 4 or 5 years to give the council time to recover from the pandemic. They're currently looking into the situation, which could turn up something that would satisfy everyone. But one thing I would ask is, if this is approved today, that we keep the condition on there that whoever's living there has to be named. I think, from my understanding, that is actually there, and that is something I think we need to keep. Thank you then.
Thank you very much. I got 2 speakers so far. Councillor Des Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Some of Councillor Matthews' sound was dropping in and out for me, so I apologise if I'm repeating something that's been asked. I note that the site has been located here for approximately 9 years, and at the appeal, the inspector said significant weight should be given to the personal circumstances in this case, including the conditions at the applicant's mother's house, and that's taken into account in the children's interest. Well, if within 9 years, are those conditions still apparent, or has things improved?
Okay, yeah, come back to that. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Can the officer comment on the green wedge status? In other words, the shot you put on the screen earlier, does it extend much further than that piece of land? In other words, how big is the green wedge? And whilst I 100% sympathise with the local members, I mean, I found myself in a similar position in Garden Village, where we had a green wedge for generations, and the last LDP was drawn up, it disappeared. And now they're going to build 750 houses on what was green wedge. So nothing's in tablets of stone. And, I sympathise 100% with the local member, because I was faced with the same problem. But can the officer answer me about the green wedge? Is it in the current LDP shown as green wedge? And how big is it? In other words, is there much more land available?
Okay. No other hands up. Anyone else wish to speak before we call the officer back in? No? All right, Andrew, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As I said, I'm going to start with Councillor Evans' comments first, because Ian's on the slide. So the green wedge effectively is all of that area shown. You can see Gleis at the northern end and the top of Birch Grove at the southern end. So that's the extent of the green wedge that we are referring to in this application. Obviously, it's a green wedge as identified within the local development plan. But it was previously a green wedge in the unitary development plan when the original application was considered, when the appeal was considered, and when the 2017 application was considered. So it does have status in the LDP, and policy ER3 clarifies the considerations that need to be taken into account when looking at development in the green wedge. Allied to this, as you'll see in the report, national policy in terms of planning policy Wales refers to substantial weight should be attached to any harmful impact which a development would have on the purposes of a green wedge designation. So we accept the substantial weight leaning against this proposal. In terms of the personal circumstances with regards to Councillor Thomas's comments outlined in the previous appeal, when the appeal was originally heard, the residents weren't resident on this site. So the conditions being referred to were elsewhere, which is why this site was required back in 2012 and allowed an appeal on 2013. So, as I said, there are still significant personal circumstances in the determination of this application, which is why, and I can confirm for Councillor Matthews, that a personal permission would be, or has been recommended. As I said, that's the recommendation before councillors. So throughout this time, from the original application through to the present time, the site has been green wedge, and substantial weight in policy terms is afforded against that. However, as in the original appeal decision, the inspector went through each individual issue as part of the appeal to say where substantial weight was afforded in favour of the application, which included the need for sites pitches, the lack of available alternatives, the evidence that the appeal is that a need was originally identified back in 2007. And there was effectively considered to be a failure of policy in terms of to not provide for alternate sites. The personal circumstances of the family were considered, and as I said, they are still a considerable material consideration. And in the intervening period, there are now 7 children on site as opposed to 3. So the authority, as I said, when you look at the advice contained in the condition circular about when it is appropriate to attach a condition limiting a permission on a temporary basis, there is clear guidance, and one of that is expected that planning circumstances will change in a particular way at the end of that period, and the guidance says, and I quote, this is my emphasis, a temporary permission may be justified. So we're in a situation where we've already had 2 temporary permissions, and we, the local planning authority, don't consider, officers don't consider another further temporary permission can be justified on the basis that there are very exceptional circumstances, and these circumstances are very exceptional. Any other application in the green wedge will be considered in accordance with policy, and as we always do, we weigh up a proposal in terms of policy and its compliance with policy, and consider any material planning considerations, which we've done in this case. And as I said, it's the opinion of officers that a further period cannot be justified. When the appeal was originally considered, the appeal inspector effectively said 4 years was more than enough time for the authority to provide alternate pitches. And those haven't been provided to date. And even the site that was indicated in the LDP has fallen by the wayside. It hasn't been developed. Now, yes, we have been in a pandemic for the last 18 months. The authority is still working, and things are, as I said, we've been working remotely. So we don't think that is sufficient reason to warrant a further temporary permission, given the time that has elapsed and the need that has clearly been identified for a significant period of time, which is why, as officers, we don't think a temporary permission can be justified. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I see no other hands up. No? No? Okay. Thank you very much. So, being the case, we can move to a vote, which the recommendation you find on page 31 is of approval. And we will now go to that vote. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
For.
Phil Downing.
Against.
Will Evans.
For.
Mary Jones.
For.
Mike Lewis.
For.
Richard Lewis.
For.
Des Thomas.
Against.
Linda Tyler Lloyd.
Against.
Mike White.
For.
And Paul Lloyd.
And 4.
That's 7-4-3 against you.
Well, thank you. And then we move on to item 2 now, see on page 34, which is at Rod Bavado. So back to you again, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. This application is another Section 73 application for the demolition of the existing buildings on site and the construction of a residential development comprising 29 affordable units, 3 number retail units, associated parking, landscaping and ancillary work. So I would just like again to refer members to the update sheet. You'll note that condition 1 will need to be amended to refer to the latest up-to-date plans, and the description of development also refers to that plan, so will need to be updated. The application is to be considered at planning committee as the original development exceeded the development threshold and was considered at committee, and this application seeks amendments to that permission. So planning permission for the original development was granted in January 2021 and has now commenced. This application, as you'll see in the red line site boundary, relates solely to the rear element of the site. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian, I'm just going to give you a quick reminder of the site and its context. This is an aerial view from Google. So the slide shows an aerial photograph of the site taken before the development commenced, with the former Julian's building located in the middle, access from the roundabout at the bottom of the screen, with housing to the rear at a higher level and open ground either side. If you can go on to the next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. This just shows the approved site layout. So it's just a bit of an overview slide. It shows the layout as approved, and no changes are proposed at the front of the site, with the commercial units at the front with flats above, and a mixture of dwellings and flats at the rear, which is subject to this application. So the access and front half of the site remains the same as previously approved. If you can go on to the next slide, please, Ian. This shows the rear of the site effectively, and as you'll note, there's an approved gabion wall shown along the rear of plots 21 to 29. So just note the proximity of the gabion wall to the side boundary on the western side, and previously concerns were raised with regards to the proximity of the wall to plots 24 to 29, and the relationship of these plots to the retaining wall. So this is the proposed site layout, please, Ian, if you can go to the next slide. So this shows the proposed site layout with a narrower retaining wall changed from the gabion baskets in a slightly revised location and to a larger extent. So it does now extend down halfway to between the rear of plots 17 and 18, and is located further within the site, as you'll note. The retaining wall is now in closer proximity to the properties along the western side of the site, but along the northern boundary, the narrower wall profile compared to that of a retaining wall, the gabion wall, has resulted in greater distances from the rear elevation to the north-facing properties. Just to give you the rationale for this change, after receiving planning permission, the applicant became aware of a Welsh water drain running alongside the western boundary of the site. You'll note the lighter green colour there is the easement effectively. So the retaining wall, the gabion wall, could not therefore be constructed in its approved location, which has resulted in the submission of this application. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian, it's just to show the sections. So this just shows 3 sections through the site, basically. The top shows the proposed section through plot 21, which is one in the northwestern corner. So it's not the furthest dwelling in the corner, but it's up there just to show the relationship of the rear elevation to the retaining wall. The middle shows the proposed section through plots 24 to 25 with dwellings at a higher level. So these are the north-facing gardens, effectively. These are the ones that this is the improved relationship over and above the approval. And the bottom left shows the relationship with the rear of plot 19. So again, on the western side, but just indicates the kind of levels and impact that this proposal is going to have. You'll also note on all 3 of the sections that there are fences on top of the retaining wall that you can see. If you can go to the next pictures, please, Ian. Thank you. These are photographs of the site as it is today. Effectively, the wall has been installed because there were safety reasons associated with the works. So the top right is a photograph looking from what would be the rear elevation of plot 23 in the corner on the retaining wall that's in situ. And the lower left photograph again is similar, looking north into the same corner, but shows what the garden area would be like with fencing proposed on top, just so you're aware, to stop overlooking into the garden. In terms of the application, we've had 3 letters of objection in response to the application, raising concerns with the development itself, the provision of social housing, and issues caused by the development, including drainage and the breach of the SUDS approval body consent. In terms of consultees, there have been no objections from Natural Resources Wales, Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, the tree officer or the council's ecologist. Whilst the drainage officer has objected based on non-compliance with the SAB approval, it should be noticed that this is entirely separate legislation and separate from any permission granted. So in terms of the key changes, in visual terms, the change to the retaining wall from a stepped gabion wall to the blockwork wall shown there is considered acceptable visually. In amenity terms, the revisions have resulted in a longer expansive wall in closer proximity to properties 17 to 23. However, the revised wall design has resulted in benefits to plots 24 to 29 by moving the wall further away. Concerns were noted in the original committee report with regards to the impact on residents in terms of outlook, the overbearing impact and the resultant size and usability of the garden space, and the application was an on-balance decision. And clearly, any reduction in space of gardens is clearly regrettable. But it should be noted that on balance, the proposals would improve the situation for the more sensitive north-facing properties, whilst reducing it for the less sensitive western-facing gardens, which will still experience sunlight throughout the day. So the recommendation is one of approval, subject to a deed of variation to the previously signed Section 106 agreement, and the conditions which have been updated to reflect the current situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And first we've got Mr. Richard John would like to address the committee. And thank you for your patience, Mr. John, but over to you now for your 5 minutes, please.
Chairman, thank you for affording me the opportunity to address the committee today. The proposed amendment concerns the relocation of a retaining wall which will result in the loss of garden space for plots 21, 22 and 23. Policy PS2 of the Local Development Plan requires that development should enhance the quality of places and spaces. A reduction in the size of any plot detracts from the principles of placemaking, which require development to produce spaces which people want to live in. Any increase in size to plots on the northern boundary only serves to highlight the loss to those plots on the western boundary. The plots will no longer have a symmetry. The local planning department states that plot 23 does not meet the requirements of the adopted residential design guide. Plots that do not meet the requirements of the adopted residential design guide should not be developed. The local planning department highlights the main issue as the impact on the visual and residential amenity. This isn't necessarily the case. The main issue is the effect this will have on placemaking and the well-being of future residents. The residents of plots 21, 22 and 23 should not be disadvantaged. Placemaking can't happen if certain plots are superior to others that fall below the adopted standards on the same development. I therefore respectfully request that the committee put the well-being of future residents before the aspirations of the developer and refuse the proposed amendment on grounds of placemaking and well-being. A decrease in the number of plots on the western boundary would allow an increase in garden space for the remaining plots and serve to reduce the balance in this regard. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hand it back to Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew just said when we were looking at the slide with the wall about there's the north-facing gardens that are the ones with this high wall, but he didn't mention the sort of sunlight. He only mentioned on the western side, which will obviously gain. So am I to understand that these now with this large wall are going to be permanently in shadow? And I agree with Mr. John, actually, when you look at it, it doesn't look as if it's, an amenable place. It's very difficult to judge it because we can't actually see it, physically. So we don't know what the impact on the house is because obviously there's no house on that particular plot. And looking at a wall like that, from this perspective, it just looks like a bit of a prison, I'm sorry. So can we have some kind of answer to say what kind of detriment there's going to be more for plots? I think it's 21 to 23.
Yeah, will do. All right, thank you. Councillor Evans. Yeah, can I mute yourself, please, Will?
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
On the point raised by the objection of 21, 22, 23, Andrew, can you comment? Is the size of the residential amenity area for those properties, does it comply with our minimum requirements? They may be smaller than perhaps other houses on the estate, but that's not my main concern. Do they actually comply with our requirements?
Okay, we'll come back to that now. Any other member wish to speak? No, sure. Okay, thanks. Andrew, just a few points there. If you would.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, do you mind putting the presentation back on, please, just to show the proposed layout, and then I'll talk through the responses. Yes, thank you. So in fact, if you can just go up one to the previous slide, just to talk about the original situation. Right, thanks, Ian. When this, in terms of the SPG, Residential Design Guide, is guidance effectively that helps us interpret planning policy. So planning policy PS2 is the placemaking policy that this application is being considered against. The Residential Design Guide gives minimum standards in terms of the space associated with dwellings, amenity space, set-off distances, etc. So those are set out in section 15 of the SPG. What you'll note here in terms of one of the requirements of the policy is that as a minimum, the garden area should meet the minimum size of the footprint of the dwelling. So with your previously approved scheme, plots 26 and 27 didn't meet the size of the dwellings. But as I said, when this came to committee previously, it was an on-balance decision, and it was considered that overall, in the planning balance, when everything was weighed together, those were acceptable. What you've got now, if you can go to the proposed layout, thank you, Ian. Plot 23 actually has space to the north of the property as well. So in terms of, if you include the area of land...
Can it be enlarged, please? Is it possible? That's a bit better, thank you.
Thank you. So plot 23, as an end of terrace property, actually has amenity space at the side for bins and the pathway. So that property, when you include the overall rear amenity space, exceeds the footprint of the dwelling. Plots 22 and plots 21 do not meet the minimum area in terms of the footprint of the dwellings. But what you'll note now is that plots 26 and plots 27 do. So what we're considering here are, in terms of, again, the overall planning placemaking balance, whilst ideally it would be, as I said, you'd want everything to meet the minimum standards. When this application was previously considered, it was considered acceptable. What we've got now is a difference between the north-facing properties, which are more sensitive because they're north-facing, so the sun comes round in a southern arc from east to west, and the properties themselves will inhibit the sun. So you've got now additional space for those properties, which is welcomed. So it's recognised in the SPG that north-facing properties are more sensitive. On the western boundary, where you've got block 3 there, plots 21 to 23, what again you'll have is the sun coming round in a southern arc, but the buildings itself won't be impacting in terms of light to the same degree that they would have for block 4 originally. So whilst the situation as a result of this change has resulted in a poorer impact on properties plots 21 to 23, it has resulted in a better impact for plots 24 to 29. And in the planning balance, we consider overall that is acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we got no hands up to speak. Oh, sorry, Councillor Evans again. Yeah.
Can I just ask Andrew? I mean, for consistency, surely we just can't, on a whim, decide that these two houses, 21 and 22, except what you say for 23, it's increased, but it falls below the minimum standard. So when you've got a family there with children, for instance, their outside amenity area is greatly reduced. So, and you were saying that's acceptable because other houses on the site have been made bigger. Well, I can't really understand your logic. Can you explain that again?
Okay. I got.
Yeah.
So, go on, Andrew. Sorry.
Sorry, what I was going to say is obviously when this application was originally reported to Planning Committee, the SPG contains guidance which helps officers interpret the planning policy. So the SPG states as a minimum, as I said, that the garden area should meet the footprint of the dwelling, and we would always seek to achieve that. When the application is considered in terms of compliance with obviously the development plan and all material planning considerations, as a 100% affordable housing scheme, this scheme was considered acceptable previously on balance, with 2 plots having a shortfall in terms of not meeting the requirement of the garden areas being equivalent to the same size as the footprint of the dwelling. Now, those properties are obviously more impacted as a result because they're north facing with a gabion wall at the far end of it. What we're saying now is the situation is different in terms of it is materially different to the approved scheme, but we've got 2 properties which are less sensitive to change compared to 2 properties which the impact would have been greater on. So we actually consider as officers this proposal, whilst in a perfect world, we would have every application complying with all the minimum requirements. We've obviously considered this acceptable. Members have considered this acceptable with a shortfall of 2 properties. And that is the same in the situation in this instance. However, we as officers consider the impact on those properties is acceptable because they're less sensitive given their orientation.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Got Councillor Mike Lewis next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was only going to reiterate what Andrew just said, actually, because the last time this came to committee, we approved this with plots 26 and 27 being smaller than they actually the compliance was. And we passed it through. Now those plot 26 and 27 are above the minimum standard, but because of a drainage problem and a main drain going down the side of the road and which the developer didn't know about before he started, it means a reduction of 2 plots the other side, but as Andrew has stated, the sun coming on an arc in the south would illuminate those plots anyway, and give more space on to be illuminated on plots 26 and 27. So I can't see that this is any different to what we voted on previously. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mary Jones. No?
She's gone.
Okay. Anyway, bring her back in now. Councillor White then first. Councillor White?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity, really. When the plans for this development were first submitted, surely the developer would have known the actual dimensions of the layout of the gardens. Can we have clarity on that? If they were aware that of the guidelines within our policy? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, man. Councillor Jones? No. Okay.
Shall I? Well, I'll tell you what, Chair. I'll respond to Councillor White in the first instance. Thank you. They were aware, Councillor. As you see, if you see the overall site layout, if you can go to that plan, please, Ian. Just to show, as part of the original proposals, as officers, can you go to the next one up again, please, Ian? Sorry, the overall site plan. Thank you. As part of the overall proposals, we sought amendments to various aspects of the development. And as I said, it was an on-balance decision. Obviously, it was providing 100% affordable housing, and there's a strong need for affordable housing in the authority, which weighed heavily in favour of the application at that time. The applicant couldn't provide at the time the required distances, and on balance, we brought it to members with a view that it was okay, it was acceptable. when everything was weighed up. So they would have been aware, but they've asked us to make the decision on that basis. They clearly at the time, unfortunately, weren't aware of the precise location of the water main, which has impacted on this development. But as a result of the redesign, there are positives as well as negatives, which is why, as I said, on balance, we think this situation overall is acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I know of an instance in my own ward years ago whereby Welsh Water said there was no main there. You can guess the rest when the developer started work. Is Councillor Jones back? No?
No, she must have dropped out into their problems.
Yeah, okay. Thank you then. Thank you, members. No other hands up to speak. So we can move to a vote, which you see on page 43 is one on for approval.
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
For.
Phil Downing.
For.
Will Evans.
For.
Mary Jones, not present. Mike Lewis.
For.
Richard Lewis.
For, Chairman.
Thank you.
Des Thomas.
For.
Linda Tyler Lloyd.
For.
Mike White.
For.
And Paul Lloyd.
Yeah, Paul, thank you.
So it's 9 for,
Carried.
none against.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
unanimous.
carried. Thank you all very much. And that concludes our business for today. And we'll see you on the 22nd is our next meeting, an extra planning committee. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Chairman. Cheers, others. Bye.